Colonel Benjamin Alvin Drew is a NASA astronaut and retired United States Air Force officer who flew on 2 space flights and was the 200th person to walk in space. Drew graduated from the United States Air Force Academy in 1984, earning his commission as a second lieutenant. His initial assignment was as a combat rescue helicopter pilot. Drew also served in the U.S. Air Force Special Operations, during which time he flew 60 combat missions in operations over Panama, the Persian Gulf, and northern Iraq. In 1992, he returned to flight training, obtained a rating in jet aircraft, and became a test pilot at the Naval Test Pilot School. He later worked as a project test pilot, commanded 2 flight test organizations, and served in the U.S. Air Force Air Combat Command Staff. In July of 2000, Drew was selected as a mission specialist by NASA. After completing 2 years of training and evaluation and serving in technical assignments for several years, he became a crew member on the STS-118 Space Shuttle Endeavour mission to the International Space Station. In 2009, he served as Director of Operations at the Gagarin Cosmonaut Training Center in Star City, Russia. Drew retired from the U.S. Air Force as a colonel in 2010, with more than 25 years of service. During his Air Force career, he piloted 30 different kinds of aircraft, accruing more than 3,500 flying hours. After retiring from the United States Air Force, Drew continued his work with NASA, and in 2011, he was a member of the Space Shuttle Discovery's final mission, STS-133. During the Discovery mission, Drew became the 200th person to perform a spacewalk. Benjamin Drew has logged more than 612 hours in space and is currently serving as the NASA liaison to Air Force Space Command, NORAD U.S. Northern Command, and U.S. Strategic Command.
Ladies and gentlemen, Colonel Retired Alvin Benjamin Drew, interviewed by Major Nicole Nuss.
Sir, you were here in 2006 for Airwork College, so welcome
Yes.
back.
Thank you.
I know NASA keeps you very busy, so we really appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to be with us this week and share your story with us all.
I was wonderful to be back with the folks who are thinking big thoughts about the future of the Air Force.
Great. Well, most of us have ever only dreamed of being an astronaut. So tell us when you decided to become an astronaut.
Well, it was until I was about 5.5. And so it took a while to
That
come
late,
around to the
huh?
idea. Yeah, I think when I was maybe 4 years old, my dad took off on a business trip from what's now Baltimore Washington International Airport, and I went out there and watched the jets take off out of there, and I came back, I think, just obsessed with flying. I'm trying to remember, I think you talked about, just going out to your airplane the first time and knowing that's where you belong, and I just knew from that point forward. Now, I had a mother who was a kindergarten teacher, her mother was a teacher, and they both saw an opportunity to pour gasoline on that fire, and they said, well, let's keep this, give them model aircraft, keep them going, but also make sure that's linked to getting good grades and staying out of trouble. I think it wasn't for another 1.5 years I was in first grade and suffering through arithmetic, and not very gladly at that. And the principal came in and stopped the class, so things were already looking up. And she drug out this old black and white TV with the rabbit ear antennas. It's like, we're going to give up arithmetic to watch TV. This is my kind of day. So I watched this, this Saturn V rocket with steam pouring out of it, and this guy counting backwards from 10. And when it hit ignition, this thing took off and went straight up, which I thought was more spectacular than even an airplane coming off a runway. So when it was all said and done, I turned to the principal and said, what's this all about? He says, well, this is Apollo 7. This is the beginning of our race to the moon. And even at 5.5, I knew a little bit about the fact that that was nuts. You couldn't get to the moon. It was, first of all, it was all the way up in the sky, and you just couldn't get there. She assured me that I should keep watching, that unless God willing, we'd have folks on the moon in the next year or so. Sure enough, that following summer, I'm watching the Apollo 11 mission. When Armstrong and Aldrin are prancing around the moon, jumping up and around in these silver suits. And I turn to my dad and go, how much do you have to pay to get to go to the moon? So I'm trying to figure out, what kind of career I need to go into. And he says, well, if you're an astronaut, they pay you to go to the moon. like, that doesn't even look like work, and they're paying you to do this. So I get a job where they pay me to not do work. Where do I sign up for that? And it says, and should I, what should I do? Should I be a pilot or should I be an astronaut? And he goes, well, at this point, except for like one astronaut at that time, all the astronauts have been test pilots. So you can do both those things. They don't exclude you. Well, that's good, even better. And he goes, there's some fine print here. You need to not get in trouble. You need to get good grades and don't talk back to your parents. And I said, how about 2 out of 3? Can we negotiate this? And from that point forward, I was suffering arithmetic a little bit more gladly because I was training to become an astronaut.
Wow. So did you ever waver from that goal, or?
Of course, as I got older, I think somewhere between 12 and 16 years old, reality set in. It was clear to me that astronauts were guys who were about 11 or 12 feet tall. They could jump over buildings in a single bound. I was going to top out somewhere around 5'10", and I'd be happy to clear a 3-foot bar. And so I knew that I wanted to go be part of space program some way or another. So I said, well, go be an astrophysicist or an aerospace engineer, and I couldn't decide which one of those, which is why you see me with the 2 majors out of the academy. I still couldn't decide. But I still put in the Air Force Academy because they were one of the few programs back in 1980 that had a dedicated program for astronautical engineering. Everything else was, you go be a mechanical engineer for 3.5 years, and then the final semester will give you one aerospace course. And didn't want to go design refrigerator compressor units for all that amount of time. So sorry for those of you who do that for a living. Went there, and on my freshman year, we had our visit from our sponsor unit, which was the navigator training wing at Mather. And I remember there was a guy named Colonel Bailows, and I'm explaining to him my grand strategy. I'm, I think, 17 and a half at this point, and I've got it all figured out how I'm going to go and design spacecraft and be the next Clarence Kelly Johnson of spacecraft, because I clearly wasn't going to get to fly him. And he looked at me like I'd said something obscene to him. Like, what did I just do wrong? This was the first time I ever dealing with a full colonel in my life, and he's scowling at me, and I'm thinking, this can't be good. And he goes, son, this is the Air Force. We fly. And I said, if you think you want to go fly, you need to go get yourself a set of wings and set about becoming an astronaut. We take on the difficult missions. And as you heard in our, just previous, that you risk failure, but go out there, better to fail trying than to fail to try at all. And that was all the guidance I really needed. I also, at the same time, I had forgotten if I was being recruited by the physics department to get a physics major. I won't go into that long story, but one of the guys, the instructors there, said, yeah, if you want to go be an astronaut, all you got to do is come out of the academy with good grades again. Sounds like my dad. Go be a decent pilot, and that way you can compete for test pilot school. And it says, and this is summer of 1980. He goes up and it says, all of our Air Force astronauts have been test pilots. So he laid out this flagstone path. Oh, that's simple. It's 17. Like, go to pilot training, get some wings, be a test pilot, be an astronaut. How easy could that be? And I took the bait. Of course, each of those about crossing the Himalayas on foot, but that when I was gullible enough to follow that advice.
And your Air Force career, even prior to becoming a NASA astronaut, was very impressive. Can you give us a little background?
Well, it certainly wasn't the straight line path to becoming an astronaut. So somewhere in the middle of that whole thing, being a cadet, my morals got corrupted, and I looked at helicopters and said, boy, that looks like fun. Sorry. I'm getting the finger wag from her. I was down at Clark Air Base on Operation 3rd Lieutenant, and just almost as an afterthought, they had laid me in for a H-3 ride down to Manila, and that just seemed like my idea of flying. They got windows open, gunners' belts, flapping in the breeze, and guys with their sleeves rolled up, and a few of them chomping on cigars. And as opposed to the kind of the sanitary experience I'd had on other airplanes, where guys are wearing G-suits and oxygen masks and just scrunched up in the airplane like turtles. And like, this is like riding a Harley through the sky. That's what I want to go do. Just be some flying biker dude. And almost on cue as I'm walking away, I had one of the co-pilots in that squadron come over and tell me that flying helicopters was the best decision he'd ever made to go do, and he was just fired up about the whole thing. And so, of course, I came back and announced to my air officer commanding that I was going to go fly helicopters, and she looked at me like I was off my medications. Sent me down to one of the other air officers commanding who had made this same egregious error. He wanted to go fly in Vietnam before the war was over back in 1972, and figured that he knew the war was winding down, so he put in for helicopters. That was going to be a short path to get out there. And sure enough, he got time flying Huey gunships, got a few bullet holes in his helicopters, and of course, when they're Air Force demobilized their helicopter fleet, he went back through the fixed-wing conversion and wound up flying A-7s. So this is a guy who had taken the righteous path after erring, and he was flying fighters, and he could spare me that mistake. So we sat down for an hour and talked about his experiences flying fighters and gunship helicopters. And at the end of that, I said, all you got to do is tell me, sir, that pound for pound flying helicopters wasn't the most fun you ever had, and I will take that assignment to Reese, flying jets. And he goes, there's an honor code here at the Air Force Academy. I cannot tell you that. So off I was to ruin my career flying helicopters. I wound up flying combat rescue and then going down to Eglin just in time for Air Force Special Operations Command to stand up. So I got to go fly combat missions and special operations up until about 92. And it was great as long as you're bulletproof and immortal. By the time I was 28, I was feeling a whole lot less immortal about the whole thing, and also a little bit starved for using the left-hand side of my brain. And so I put in for test pilot school at that point.
So in 2000, or around 2000, you applied to be a NASA astronaut, correct?
Yes.
What was your reaction when you were actually selected?
I thought they'd picked the wrong guy. There must be another Alvin Drew out there. So the longest part of that story was I applied in '97 to become an astronaut while I was still an active test pilot, and told by the Air Force that I was not medically qualified. I was medically unsuitable for space duty, I think was the tactful wording they used in the letter they sent back to me. I've always had high cholesterol. I think they diagnosed it with me when I was 19 years old, and I was boxing, so I knew that it was never going to get any lower than that, because I was eating like brown rice and lettuce and hitting a heavy bag and running 7 miles a day through the mountains. And this is the best my cholesterol was ever going to be, and it was a whole lot worse by the time I was in my mid-30s. So what turns out they called NASA, because the Air Force has rules, and having high cholesterol is like having a trial membership in the Taliban, according to the flight surgeons. At one point I had been grounded for having high cholesterol, until I argued with the command's chief surgeon about, okay, well, what risk does this have? I said, well, you might have a heart attack when you're 65. And I says, okay, if you want to ground me when I'm 64, feel free to do that. We've worked that all out. But anyhow, they checked with NASA, and they said, what's your waiver requirements for high cholesterol? And NASA says, we don't waive high cholesterol. What they were saying was that they don't track cholesterol. It was something they worried about. The Air Force figured if you had high cholesterol in NASA, they were, as properly should be, you just got grounded. You were just taken out of the flying career field. And that's why they didn't. So by 2000, applied again. The medical crew group was debating this hotly, even up to the point where we had to turn in the applications, and could not reach a decision. So I had a GS7 in the Personnel Center at San Antonio goes, I think your application looks competitive. I'm just going to let NASA kick you out, and kick it over the fence. And that's how we got past that impasse. That's what we found out later. So of course I'm waiting for a polite rejection letter from NASA about this whole thing. And so I get this postcard in the mail one day, and boy, you think they sent me a nice rejection letter, an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper with a nice NASA logo on it or something. I'll get a postcard. So I read the postcard to see what nice words they had to say about me being medically unsuited for space duty. And they said, we need you to report down to Johnson Space Center for your interview at the end of January. Right person? Yeah, okay, I'll go down there. So I still had no illusion that they were going to pick me. And so I just wasn't really stressed about the whole thing. I'm going to go meet some people who walked on the moon. I'm going to talk with some astronauts, have a fine interview, and get a great $30,000 medical checkup, and go back to my life. And so we sat down and had this interview, and we cut up like a bunch of flyers, and we told tales. And that was fun. And then about 3 months later, I'm packing up my bags at Langley to head down to take over a test squadron at Eglin. And I just got all my clearances updated. So I just done a background check, and this guy shows up on my doorstep doing yet another background check. And I'm going, did you find something bad on the first background check? And he goes, no, this is for NASA. And I said, well, if they're going to spend $100,000 doing another background check, they're probably serious about hiring me. So I called them. I said, I'm about to move, so if you're going to call me, here's another number you can reach me. And about 2 months later, they did. They called me up and asked me if I wanted the job.
And you accepted, obviously.
I told him I could learn to love the job. I'm not joking. That's what I told the guy. He still reminds me about that to this day.
So you were selected as a mission specialist. Can you tell us a little bit about what the role of a mission specialist at NASA
Okay,
is?
so mission specialist is the biggest misnomer you can think of. Mission specialist is like you're focused tightly on one particular task. Mission specialist is everything the pilot doesn't do. So it's the mission generalist. So you've got if the robot arm needs to be operated on the shuttle or the space station, you operate the robot arm. If you need to go out and do a spacewalk, nobody wants to risk having the pilot locked outside the shuttle, so they send a mission specialist.
That would be a problem.
Usually, they were starting to put guys who had multi-place flying experience in the second row. Basically, two flight engineers sitting behind these guys. So we got to read the checklist to a couple of college graduates, but it was good for human factors. A lot of these guys came out of fighters and were just parsing out the tasks sometimes under heavy loads. It was helpful to have somebody who was used to just kind of just doing that load sort for those guys on how to figure out what goes where. So they tended to put us on those particular ones. So you got to be the flight engineer sitting in that second row. If there was any medical experiments, all of us got to be guinea pigs. You got to be stuck with needles and electrocuted and prodded and all those other fine things as well. So, but for me, the big ones I felt that where I was contributing was as a flight deck engineer, doing spacewalks and operating the shuttle's robot arm.
So originally you were not slated to be crew on the Endeavour STS-118, correct? What was your reaction when you got that call saying you were going to space?
First I thought I was on a different mission. Okay, so usually you get assigned to missions about a year before you go because it's a year of just dedicated practice for that particular mission. And STS-118, and this is May of 2007, was slated to go off in August of 2007. And that crew had been picked over a year ago. My class was just becoming to the point where we were in the queue to fly in 2008. And so I'm thinking there was a mission right behind it, STS-119, which was going to happen a year later. And, it's like, I wonder if I'm, in the hunt for that particular, because they don't tell you. It's like some of your deepest, darkest secrets out there. And you just never know if you're up for a mission or not. And didn't give it a whole lot of thought because there were 16 other members of my class who were also up for those, and we're about all evenly matched. I was training to work in mission control as what's called Capcom. Anytime you hear Houston talk back to a spacecraft, it's always the voice of another astronaut who's doing that because they can know how to usually phrase things in ways, use small words and speak slowly, unlike the really smart guys in mission control. So I was just doing my first checkout run in mission control with the flight director and with one of my instructor Capcoms. And it's a Friday afternoon and the phone rings right about 4:30 in the afternoon. And it's the chief astronaut, and he has a little squawk box on his desk, so here's all the simulation runs going on. He goes, when you get off, I need you to come over to the office and talk to me. And I'm going, geez, was I that bad? Did I really goof this up? So I go over to his office, and he goes, shuttle mission in August. And I'm thinking August 2008. Cool, I'm going to be on 119. He goes, no, August 2007, you're on STS-118. I was like, that's 3.5 months from now. He goes, yeah, you're already behind schedule. You need to go home and study this weekend. And so it was a complete shock when I was on that mission. The longer story about it is the mission had delayed from March, from spring into late summer. We had one of our space station crew members up who was supposed to come down, and that lady by the name of Sunny Williams. Well, women have fairly short radiation exposure limits according to OSHA, and to have left her up for her scheduled mission down would have made her ineligible for further missions. She'd have hit her lifetime exposure to radiation from being in space. So they brought her down on the previous mission, and that left the seat open. And the commander said, I need all 7 hands for this mission. It was a very busy mission. He says, can you find somebody just to yank forward to put on that mission who was not going to panic? He told me I had 3 months to prepare. And they decided that wasn't sufficiently excitable, so they put me on the mission.
So what was your role in that mission?
I was basically the cargo master on that mission. We had a big module that just was a big trunk full of gear to bring up to the space station to outfit it. And we also we were doing construction outside with the spacewalkers, and the robot arm operators already had that locked up. The part that Sunny was working, because she was working the space station, was to get 2.5 tons of cargo from the module into the space station, and another 2.5 tons of cargo off the space station, experiments, things that they just didn't want to burn up in the atmosphere in a Progress capsule, back down on that shuttle. And so I was the guy who had the clipboard in my hand and this logistic stuff doing. I was glad I'd spent at least a couple of years in the Airlift Command before I'd gotten there.
So you said earlier that your family had encouraged you when you were young to
Yes.
follow that dream of being an astronaut. What was their reaction when you told them you were going up into space?
They were thrilled. They knew that that's something I wanted to do, and they were at this point at least used to me trying to take myself out of the gene pool, jumping out of planes, flying special operations helicopters and test flying things. So wanting to strap 4.5 million pounds of cryogenic high explosives and get blasted into space was just what they were used to seeing from me. I had a little brother, so it wasn't like I was going to end the family line there that way. So they were happy about that, although I got to tell you that when we lifted off at about 60 seconds, and if you've ever seen one of those launches from the shuttle, right at about 60 seconds after the launch, when that sound has hit you and you've got this, this brilliantly white, flame going, it's just awesome. It's like, it's got to be as close as you can come to be like Moses on the mountain somewhere. It's a religious experience. And it's, even when I watch it, I get a lump in my throat. And my brother-in-law, who had this fancy camera that he blamed me for having to buy, had swept around the crowd with his high telephoto lens, and he had a couple of pictures of my parents, and they've got tears just streaming down their cheeks at 60 seconds into the flight. And when I did get back from that mission, my mom told me, hey, I'm back and I'm fine. She goes, don't mean to put any cramp in your style, but while I'm alive, there's no going to the moon for you. And she says, if you're going to go to the moon, you get to wait till I'm dead. I said, there's no chance. By the time we go to the moon again, I'll probably be dead too, so don't worry about it. So, but they were always supportive, even though I'm sure I scared the daylights out of them with some of my career choices.
Sure. So you were also on the Discovery's final mission, STS-133. You only had 3.5 months to train for your first mission. How long was the training for Discovery?
I had a decadent 15 months to train for that one. It wasn't planned that way. Once again, I was over in Star City at the time as basically an airbase group commander. I had all the non-Russian astronauts over there trained to make sure doing what I call heads and beds, making sure that they had their checklists were translated in English, they had a place to stay, there was transportation, all those fine things. One of the things we had was all the internet servers for both us and the Russian side of the base. And we were trying to put in fiber optic networks for these guys too, just because we wanted to have fiber optics. And so what we asked them to do was make sure that we had connectivity to the apartments that we were renting from the Russians there on the base. And the internet line was frequently down. It was like a rat's nest where that server was. Anybody who does that type of stuff for comm in the Air Force would just go lay on the floor and flop around if they saw this thing, and it was down often. So I called up and says, our apartments are down again, and the guy called and reports back to me in Russian and says, well, we're getting a new fiber optic network and we no longer need NASA support, so we're really not going to go and support your apartments. Go away. So to emphasize to the Russians that we're still their internet service provider, I went into the server room and just switched off all of our servers to the Russian side, which was kind of a big no-no. You don't go and do that without coordinating with like NASA, the State Department, all these other fine things. But I knew those guys would be nicer to the Russians than we really needed to be, and the Russians weren't going to go lodge a complaint about it. Sure enough, 3 days later, they come back and go, we'll be happy to give service to your apartments if you'll restore our internet connectivity. So servers come back on. That same night, I get a phone call from my boss, but my boss's boss was an email going, you need to call me as soon as the lights come on in Houston, because we're 9 hours ahead of them. I'm going, okay, here's the part where I get sent home. And so he calls on the phone and he goes, what's up? He goes, STS-133. I'm like, what's that got to do with the price of eggs in China? And there's this long pause. I'm like, yeah. He goes, you want on it? Again, just kind of completely shocked. I was told when I went to Russia that there would be no more opportunities to fly on a space shuttle, so I was giving up any more shuttle flight opportunities, but I thought that I'd done shuttle once. I'd never commanded a base in Russia, so I wanted to go do that. So it was like, maybe it's this polite way of firing me, but this is the way I get fired, I'll take it. So it wasn't. They just wanted to put me on that particular crew for that particular mission. And so I came back, and it was going to be a very short mission. It was supposed to be just 8 days. There were no spacewalks involved. Missions were getting bigger, longer, and more complex as time went on. So 8 days would have been a normal mission in the early part of the shuttle program. By the time I got there, they were calling this the drive-by mission, just go in, just drop your gear, and just get away quickly, because no missions had lasted less than 13 days up to that point since I'd been there. We're just going to put the last piece on there, give them some supplies, kiss them goodbye, go home. Well, while we were training, and so that would have been in September of 2010, we were supposed to launch. Somewhere in July of 2010, one of our 4 air conditioning systems broke down on board the space station. And we need to go take up a replacement, and we had a spare, but they used a spare, and it was a big, complex, messy thing, and they left a lot of their toys out in the yard when it was all done. They were just kind of done after 3 spacewalks, so we got to go clean up that. And of course, the guys who do spacewalks knew that there's a lot of other things that were broken on station, because a lot of the components were at least 13 years old. So So the first one was cleaning up after that air conditioning failure, and the other one I called this old station, just going out there and just with your tool belt and just putting shingles back on the roof and putting the gutters back, cleaning out the gutters for the second spacewalk. So we went from 0 spacewalks to 2 spacewalks, which moved us into November from September launch. And then once we got to our countdown in November, we had some problems with that particular shuttle, one of which was we split the tank. Now, if you have a tank containing hydrogen, if you've ever seen the Hindenburg, you realize that's probably not a good thing to have leaking hydrogen out of your tank during a countdown, especially with sparks out there. So we wheeled it back into the barn, found out why the tank was split, and welded it back together, and then that was just into February. And so I went from September of 2009 till February of 2011 to train for that mission. And we used all of that time to train. It was a lot to do on that mission.
Can you take us through a little bit of that training, what it entailed?
Sure. So the first thing you do when you come back is you'll go through what I call your initial training, which is called astronaut candidate training. They teach you, your life is dedicated to flying the shuttle. So they take a bunch of guys with no concept of how to fly of human spaceflight and put them through this whole thing, and it ends up with culminates this big check ride where they're dropping engines, they're setting you on fire. There's tarantulas jumping out from behind the dash. Not quite that bad, but. And you get yourself to orbit and then back down to Earth all in one piece with no veteran astronauts on board. So you really feel like, man, I could take this on. And then they put you in desk jobs for a bunch of years, and you do like 1 or 2 shuttle simulations every few weeks, and your skills start to degrade. So the first thing is to get you brought back up to that end of your astronaut candidate year, and then you go through a bunch of check rides. And so the shuttle is as complex, any system on the shuttle is as complex as any weapon system you'll fly in the Air Force. So the life support system is as complex as a Strike Eagle. The electrical system is as complex as a B-52. So you've got to go through these qualifications on each system, and you go through the check rides. So once they decide that you're not going to be a menace to your crew by dragging them down, then they throw you together as a crew. You'll train on all the different basic crew things, just getting to orbit, working emergencies, rendezvousing, docking, deorbiting, and landing the shuttle. You go through all those things as a crew. Meantime, you've got a whole flight control team that sits in mission control, and those guys are doing the same thing, so they're not embarrassing themselves in front of you, and you're not going to embarrass yourselves in front of them. And when we're all up to that level, we're ready to go do that. We have this integrated simulation that goes on between the two, and it's because you really have to have a bond between you and the ground, and that's because you almost have to read each other's thoughts sometimes. So we'll have these integrated simulations, and those are really, really intense. I've seen it where there's 5 things broken before we clear the tower. There's 12 more things broken before we get off the solid rocket motors, and it's going a mile a minute, and people are shouting, and they're sweating, and there's just, only times I ever see fighter pilots really get, they start to sweat beads is when they're in actual BFM, doing dogfights, and these guys during these missions, even though we're sitting in a simulator, they really are just taking it seriously. Everybody does, and so, and it's where you kind of get your status in the astronaut corps. And if you don't handle yourself well during these emergency simulations, you can go to the back of the pack very quickly, and I've seen guys actually eliminated from the astronaut corps based on their performance in those sims. So everybody takes them seriously. And then from there, it becomes more just your hardware is ready, the shuttle, all the pieces are coming together. So you start reviewing the equipment. Up to this point, the spacesuits, we train in the pool for doing spacewalking. They've got this 1-to-1 mock-up of the shuttle and the space station. So you get out there and because some of the things, the best position to work in is upside down. So you try to get out of what's called the 1G mentality, where you're going to be upright doing this thing, reaching overhead, where you can just go upside down and get it done a lot quicker. We're also in virtual reality laboratory working the robotic operations with the arm. And all this finally all comes together in the last few weeks, and then you start working with your actual hardware. You work with your actual spacesuit that you're going to do a spacewalk in. You do learn to pre-flight it and work it so you're not terrified of touching this thing, because it's in a clean room and it's all wrapped up, and if you're afraid if you touch it, you'll damage this $1 million suit and everybody's going to hate you. But you got to go walk in this thing at some point, so you go get used to that as well, and you review your equipment and start annotating your checklists. Checklists are not standardized with NASA, so you guys are used to, I think that if you take any weapon system in the Air Force, you go from one checklist aircraft to another. The checklists are pretty standard. In NASA, you got different people writing checklists, and some of them are people from aircraft backgrounds, and it reads like an aircraft checklist. Some of them read like they're writing code. It's like, take bottle, twist clockwise 5 times, remove cap. It's like, just tell me to take the cap off the bottle, please. So you learn to write your own checklist in a format that you can understand. It's called our crew notebooks, which is their way of saying that just you write your own checklist, so you're not trying to struggle through some of those things yourself. And so you do all that, and then you go into quarantine, and then you launch.
So take us through that first few minutes of a launch.
Okay. I'll just take you through the day itself. It's its own really surreal experience. So you've been in quarantine for about 10 days, let anything, and it's just minimum security prison. You know, you're not allowed outside. It's nice enough. They got the good meals and people are nice to you, and you sit there and you wake up one morning after doing this kind of a Groundhog Day thing, and go to breakfast, and of course they're asking you what you'd like, which is kind of unnerving because it feels like, you know, what would you like for your final meal before we, you know, give you your blindfold and cigarettes. And so you have your breakfast, and all these some of these people are having just like, they're eating things that are healthy, like, I'll just have some lettuce and some wheat toast. I'm like, if I'm not going to survive this day, I want some pork barbecue. Give me something, and give me some ice cream too. I'm not going to eat healthy. I'm trying to live till 75 at this point. So when you go back, and there's like all your underwear, and it's like your chem warfare gear, all the stuff you put underneath your chem suits. It's like same similar thing as on your bed for you to get suited up, and you're pulling on your little pull-ups and everything, and then you report around smartly to the suit-up room, and he's got these Barca lounger chairs, kind of like these things here, that are, you know, good to induce sleep, and these technicians basically tuck you into your orange suit, and they get this thing all clamped down on you, and they do a big pressure check, so you kind of look like this Macy's Day float, you know, after a while in there, and you're giving these guys a little thumbs up, and then finally they deflate the suit and stop laughing at you. And so you sit around there, all the photographers are taking pictures of you, and you're supposed to look like you just could care less that you're about to get blasted off the planet in a couple of hours. Then comes this weird tradition where you're not allowed to go out of the room until the commander loses a game of 5-card stud. So we're sitting around in our orange suits, helmets in hand, and we're dealing cards until the commander loses, and then we all head down to the elevator. And of course, they're giving you advice about, okay, you're going to wave, there's going to be crowds out there, don't block your crewmates' faces, you know, don't be the big diva, you know, just keep it cool. And you get on this 1983 vintage Airstream van. Now, my rookie flight, the big trick that my commander liked to do was, and then wait till the rookies get on, and always get at least one who was a Confederate. We're going down the road because everybody's got their security pass right to get through the gate, your line badge. I'm like, look, all I had was what they gave me on my bed that day. I mean, they confiscated everything else I owned. And so one of the rookies pulls out their little badge too, and so I'm sitting there feeling like an idiot. And they're sitting there looking at me like, have you figured this out yet? I'm like, okay, you got me. You so totally got me. We didn't try on the second. There were no rookies on the second mission, and the same guy was our mission commander. We get out there, and they go tuck us all into this whole thing. And the shuttle's on its back now, and it's weird, and we don't do a lot of getting in this thing. So it's this weird terra incognita. You used to have been in the shuttle for thousands of hours, and you're getting on its back, and it's like, okay, up is back and left is over, and it's just trying to make myself do that transformation. But you get in there just trying not to step on a switch, do anything that would stop that countdown. You don't want to get famous for the guy who stopped the countdown, so you just let them carry you and just gently plop you down your seat and strap you down where you just don't touch nothing. And then anybody with any sense gets at least 5 miles away from that, except for one crew who's in an M117 armored personnel carrier in a bunker 3.5 miles away, and these 6 idiots who are sitting on top of this bomb. Okay, so one of the other flight engineers, one of the previous